hi, everybody. I'm excited to be your second token male of the day. Thank you for having me. I want to give a big thank you to the organizers and all the people that make this forum possible. I'm really excited to be here. I'm very honored to be here. And as someone who organizes summits around the world, I know how much work goes into it and the amazing humans that have been convened here. I'm not sure if people have thanked all the organizers, but could we just give the entire team a round of applause? So when we had a prep call for this panel about a week and a half ago, the world was a little different. And since that call, an individual whose name I'd really rather not say has been elected President of the United States. And we were chatting about what we wanted to share with you today and the conversation we wanted to have. And I love Adrian's opening around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would add to it, there's a guy named Martin Davidson at Darden School at UVA that speaks about leveraging difference versus managing diversity. And if you're leveraging difference, it's an opportunity. If you're managing diversity, it's solving a problem. And if you're leveraging difference, it's all elements of difference. It's not just race and gender, which of course DEI in the United States has been sort of compressed into, but it's about all opportunities of difference. And that's one of the things we're going to chat about today. So I asked our amazing panelists to spend 3 minutes, and I will round it out myself as well, just telling their stories. Because that's how we create change, that's how you connect, and that's how you can understand the conversation that we will then have. So I'm going to start with Neela, and if you wouldn't mind, tell us who you are, why you're here.
Thanks so much, Todd, and thanks, everyone. Thanks to my amazing co-panelists. Really excited to be here today. There has been a lot of talk this morning about storytelling, and I want something to sink in for a moment here, that in a number of countries in the world right now, it would be illegal for me to sit here and tell my story. And if I'm sitting here and telling my story with you all, who may have similar stories or different stories, we would be subject to police raids, arrest, and charges for things like advocating for sexual orientation and gender identity that are not in conformity with national traditions and cultures. I would not be allowed to wear this rainbow pin if I were in Russia right now. There was a case recently, several months ago, where someone was arrested in Russia for wearing rainbow earrings in a cafe. So when we talk about storytelling, I think one really important thing to keep in mind, and we know this as women, right, is that some people have access to storytelling more than others. We need to make sure that everybody has access to storytelling, and one very specific way in which some people are excluded is in the rise of repressive laws that prevent people from telling stories about queer people. That is a literal barrier to storytelling, and it's in all of our interests to dismantle it. So I'm here working for Outright International. It's a global LGBTIQ advocacy organization. We work around the world in dozens of countries. I believe we have partnerships actually in over 100 countries around the world, where we work with global LGBTIQ communities to help them to tell their stories and also to push for legal and policy change and attitudinal change. And part of the reason why I'm doing this work is I'm a queer woman, although I have to say that I have in recent years come to question what the word women means. There's also been a lot of conversation at this conference about women and men, and I just want to give a shout out as well to all the non-binary people out there and those who don't identify along a rigid binary gender spectrum. Grew up in my life being assigned a female identity at birth and grew to identify as a queer woman in my teens. Got to college in the United States, founded what we called the Dyke Discussion Group, and we sat together in the dorms and talked about our stories and the issues that we cared about. And then I went out into the professional workforce and for years was working in sectors where queer issues were not discussed. I worked in education, then I started working globally in human rights, peace and security, transitional justice.
America, Human Rights Watch.
Yep, well,
an amazing organization.
Yes, I worked with Teach for America. I taught in New York City public schools. At that time, people were not talking about queer issues in New York City public schools. I think that's changed a little bit. But worked abroad in spaces where even when we were talking about human rights, we were not necessarily talking about the human rights of LGBTIQ people. And so now I have the privilege to work in a space where I am able to talk about these issues all the time, as long as I'm somewhere where I will not be arrested for talking about these issues. And my work is to elevate the voices of those in other places who are also, continuing to work through these challenges and trying to create these spaces for ourselves in a world in which over 60 countries criminalize the simple act of same-sex intimacy. About 13 countries criminalize being trans, just being trans, not doing anything, just existing as a person who presents a gender expression that is different from the norm. And that's why I'm here doing this work in this space today to elevate those voices.
Thank you, Neela. I would add on to that in all of those countries, companies around the world do business. And from a leadership perspective, that's been my platform, having companies leverage their economic power to advocate for LGBTQ inclusion around the world. So if you work for a corporation, make sure that you understand where your company works and what they can do to promote inclusion as a business driver. Sarah, I'm going to turn to you.
Great, thank you. I'm really honored to be here and to have this platform to talk about DEI. My story, I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I was raised actually about an hour north of Philadelphia in Bucks County, which would now be considered Trump country. It was Trump country when I was being raised there in the 70s, and I was the only little black girl in my elementary school, and I faced a lot of racism and sexism in that community, but I also experienced a lot of compassion and support in that community. So I understand how you can hold these very, I guess, conservative political views, but also not necessarily be a horrible person, even though right now this is a very difficult moment for me as a black woman, American woman who just suffered an incredible, devastating loss with this election. But my work is really, I've been a media entrepreneur my entire career. I founded a Black Health magazine, my first career. I run a Black Talk radio station, WURD, in Philadelphia, and I co-founded a organization called URL Media, which stands for Uplift, Respect, and Love. And URL is a network of Black and brown media organizations that share content and revenues to create more economic viability for independent Black and brown media organizations. I connect all of that to this topic, the DEI conversation, because as a little black girl, I felt invisible and automatically presumed to be, I don't know about inept, but just not enough. And there was a question that was raised in a panel before this, right before lunch, about promoting women into positions that they were not necessarily able to thrive in, or they weren't necessarily qualified for. And that has been the crux of why DEI is under attack right now in the United States. Because there's this presumption that Black people, women, people of color, other marginalized communities are, particularly I would say along race and gender, there is a presumption of ineptitude and inadequacy. And so when we come into the workforce, into the C-suite, there's this presumption that our presence there is downgrading or devaluing the quality of the work. And meanwhile, we have to work twice as hard, work twice as fast, and have to be twice as good to ascend to these positions of authority. But yet there is this presumption that we are only there because of affirmative action or DEI. And that narrative has been so damaging to Black and brown people, to women. And the work that I do with URL Media, with WURD Radio in Philadelphia, is to tell our stories and to show the diversity, the complexity, the dynamism, the brilliance in our communities, so that this idea of automatic ineptitude because of your race or gender is shown to be completely false. And I just want to finish by saying nobody questions the mediocre white men who get promoted and elevated over and over and over again. Nobody questions that the legacy admissions to colleges and universities are affirmative action. Nobody questions all of these things, and they weaponize other Black and brown people against each other. The affirmative action case that was taken in front of the Supreme Court was a group of Asian Americans. And so there's a lot of complexity right now in this space in the US around how we mobilize as people of color, how we mobilize as women. 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. I'm just going to say it. 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. 91% of black women voted for Kamala Harris. So we got a lot of work to do, and I'll get into that a little bit later.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to comment on two quick things. Sylvia Ann Hewlett had some data many years ago that rang true when you just said something. You know what percentage sure women have to be before they're asked for promotion? 89%. You know what percentage sure men have to be?
5.
11. And there's a new term that Elon Musk just tweeted about yesterday, MEI, which is the right's answer to DEI, which is merit, excellence, and intelligence. Yeah, so that's coming down the pike. Diana.
Oof, all right. I first apologize for all Asian Americans for the affirmative action case. We are, as Asian Americans, used as a wedge. 70% of Asian Americans actually support affirmative action. We were some of the original, we helped found it. So narrative storytelling, this is so critical. I'm Diana Huang. I'm the founder and executive director of the Asian American Women's Political Initiative. We're the only national level political leadership organization for Asian American and Pacific Islander women. And I think I'll start by just saying that I think the immigrant experience broke my parents. I grew up watching my mom chase my dad around with a hammer. The American dream is real, and it's also really complicated. My first job out of college was at the State House in Massachusetts, which is supposed to be a progressive state, blue state, right? And when I told my dad that I got this amazing job at the State House, right, the center of power, he was so worried about me and almost started crying. And he said to me, "You'll never be one of them." And I understood, and I think I've always understood, that that was his immigrant experience in America. I went to the State House in a state so blue, so progressive. This is 15 years ago. 200 legislators, 0 Asian American legislators. I was one of the only staff. And in this place of incredible power and influence, Asian Americans were invisible. I was like, this is what my dad felt. This is what he meant. And when you don't see faces like yours, the actual message is you don't belong. So I started the Asian American Women's Political Initiative. Our alums call it OPI. And for 10 years, I could not get people to care. I could not get people to think that my work mattered. What it took was prolonged anti-Asian hate during the pandemic, and then the mass shooting of 6 Asian women who were targeted because a white man thought getting rid of Asian women would rid his sex addiction. Stereotypes, over-sexualization of Asian American women, they have consequences. And one of the things I realized was that I'd been gaslit my entire life into thinking it was okay. Overnight, we got over 1,000 $1 to $2 donations. It was the first time in my lifetime that I felt there was a public consciousness that Asian Americans experience discrimination or even pain. And I had a donor come to me, and she said, "Look, I've done the landscape analysis, you're the only one doing the work. I have money for you, but you have to go national." And I said, "Well, I've been crying for 3 weeks, so can you give me some time?" And she said, "No, because there is a window of time where people will care about Asians." And so like all of these people in this work, organizers, advocates, whatever, we pull it together and we do it, and we did it, and the strategy is around scaling to states where Asian Americans can be the margin of victory in elections. So we've scaled to Georgia, Pennsylvania, we have a rapid expansion plan, but more than anything, I think, beyond the political, we are literally just trying to create a space where Asian American women can be whole, where they can show up as their full selves, where they can heal, because the trauma is consistent, okay? Generational trauma.
Across multiple identities.
Yes.
Right.
And generational trauma. And when we pull API women together to talk about their stories, every single one of them talks about being sexually assaulted, experienced domestic violence, experienced violence in the home.
So Dana, I want to jump and quickly round out with my story, and we're going to have an ask of this room as a follow-on. So I knew I was gay when I was 5. It took me until I was 18 to come out. I came in, went to Wall Street, started my career as an investment banker, private banker. I self-described as a recovering banker. I was the first openly gay financial advisor in Merrill Lynch's 92-year history. And I started a team of financial advisors on Wall Street to focus on LGBTQ customers and clients back in 2001. And I brought in almost $2 billion to Merrill Lynch and got Merrill to spend almost $3 million supporting LGBTQ rights at a time that no one was doing that. And I connected the bottom line to LGBT opportunity and inclusion. I ultimately ran diversity strategy for Merrill. I was head of diversity at Credit Suisse, and I got laid off, and I took my severance check and started a company called Out Leadership. And over the last 14 years, we've had 156 summits on 5 continents. We've convened over 36,000 business leaders, 1,200 CEOs, 142 multinational organizations. And we've gotten these organizations to use their economic power every place they do business to say that discrimination is fundamentally just bad for business. And I share that for a couple of reasons. One, because as I mentioned earlier, if you work for a company, you do have economic power. And we've published 51 pieces of research the last 14 years, helping companies understand what they can do. In fact, on Thursday, we're launching our 4th annual Quorum Diversity Report, which maps the board diversity policies of 9,000 companies. Because if you actually understand that most of your companies don't even have a board diversity policy, much less an LGBTQ inclusive one, that's one of our initiatives that we've been driving the last 9 years. We actually got the NASDAQ to add LGBTQ inclusion to the board diversity requirement. And in just 2 years, 51% of NASDAQ listed companies have LGBTQ inclusive board policies. I share that because it's all intersectional. As LGBTQ inclusion goes up, gender equality goes up, racial inclusion goes up. All of these conversations are connected, which is why I wanted our panelists and myself to share our stories, because you can't impact one without impacting the whole. And as Adrian said, actually, the curb cutout is a great example. The wheelie luggage did not exist before curb cutouts. I mean, the impact that you take from a margin impacts the entire whole, and that is so true in this work. So we've got exactly 2 minutes. So in 30 seconds,
you called
I know.
this, okay? She was like, if you tell stories, we're just going to go
But that
forever.
was our goal.
Yeah.
I wanted you all to hear these stories, and I want us to end with an ask of this room. So I'm going to go in the same order that we started with. Neela, what would you ask the leaders in this room to do going forward from today?
I would ask people in this room to keep in mind what Todd has just said, that if one segment of the population, in this case, if one segment of women is marginalized and remains marginalized, we have not achieved our goals. So I would like everyone in this room to go into their work remembering that if you are not pro-lesbian, you are not pro-woman. If you are not pro-trans, you are never going to advance gender equality. There is a patriarchy running this world that is deeply invested in rigid gender binaries and norms, and we need to break those binaries and norms. There's a film that my organization Outright co-produced some years ago called Lesbians Free Everyone. I want everyone to think about why that's true. Lesbians do free everyone. I think in the moment we're in right now, in 2024, it's also really important to keep in mind that trans people free everyone. Our trans siblings are under attack. Our trans siblings are the ones who show us the way that we can live our gender any way we want to. That deeply benefits all women, and I think it deeply benefits all men. So I want everyone out there to think about, as you go about your work, are queer people included? Are trans people included? If not, we haven't gotten to the root of addressing gender inequality. And while we still have these global gaps, 60 countries that criminalize, very few countries that have protective non-discrimination laws that allow trans people to exist as themselves in the workplace, we haven't accomplished our goals.
Thank you, Neela. Sarah.
Yeah, I think that, I feel very similarly that if you are not addressing the issues and the needs of the most marginalized communities, then we're never going to establish the coalition building that we've been talking about throughout this conference. I really believe that coalition building is very, very difficult. I have heard that throughout this entire 2-day conference. We need to build coalitions. But when I look at what just happened in the US,
Of course.
and we see intra-racial discord, we see discord among women, we see, I need to wrap it up?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All I can ask is that we don't just say, let's coalition build. Let's learn about each other's stories. Let's learn about each other's histories. Let's learn about each other's oppression and our exceptionalism. Because until we really know each other's pain and promise, we're not going to be able to build real coalitions.
And let's show up for each other.
And let's show up for each other.
Right? Like, I do think...
10 seconds.
Okay, we're all feeling our feelings. I think the only solace I have in this moment is that in times like this, transformational change is possible if we're really self-reflective. So you want to talk solidarity? Let's actually do it. And it's one-to-one. It's not like we have to actively show up for each other. We have to look at our own biases.
Transformation is possible. Eternal optimism on this stage. Please thank our amazing panel.